Chapter 22 Of the Secretaries of Princes. The choice of a prince's ministers is a matter of no little importance. They are either good or not according to the prudence of the prince. The first impression that one gets of a ruler and of his brains is from seeing the men that he has about him. When they are competent and faithful, one can always consider him wise, as he has been able to recognize their ability and keep them faithful. But when they are the reverse, one can always form an unfavorable opinion of him, because the first mistake that he makes is in making this choice. There was nobody who knew Messer Antonio da Venafro as the minister of Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, who did not consider Pandolfo to be a very prudent man, having him for his minister. There are three different kinds of brains. The one understands things unassisted, the other understands things when shown by others, the third understands neither alone nor with the explanations of others. The first kind is most excellent, the second also excellent, but the third useless. It is therefore evident that if Pandolfo was not of the first kind, he was at any rate of the second. For every time the prince has the judgment to know the good and evil that anyone does or says, even if he has no originality of intellect, yet he can recognize the bad and good works of his minister, and correct the one and encourage the other, and the minister cannot hope to deceive him, and therefore remains good. For a prince to be able to know a minister, there is this method which never fails. When you see the minister, think more of himself than of you, and in all his actions seek his own profit. Such a man will never be a good minister, and you can never rely on him. For whoever has in his hand the state of another must never think of himself but of the prince, and not mind anything but what relates to him. And, on the other hand, the prince, in order to retain his fidelity, ought to think of his minister, honoring and enriching him, doing him kindnesses, and conferring on him honors, and giving him responsible tasks, so that the great honors and riches bestowed on him cause him not to desire other honors and riches, and the offices he holds make him fearful of changes. When princes and their ministers stand in this relation to each other, they can rely the one upon the other. When it is otherwise, the result is always injurious either for one or the other of them. Chapter 23 How Flatterers Must Be Shunned. I must not omit an important subject in mention of a mistake which princes can with difficulty avoid, if they are not very prudent, or if they do not make a good choice. And this is with regard to flatterers, of which courts are full, because men take pleasure in their own things, and deceive themselves about them, that they can with difficulty guard against this plague, and by wishing to guard against it, they run the risk of becoming contemptible. Because there is no other way of guarding oneself against flattery than by letting men understand that they will not offend you by speaking the truth, but when everyone can tell you the truth, you lose their respect. A prudent prince must therefore take a third course, by choosing for his counsel wise men, and giving these alone full liberty to speak the truth to him, but only of those things that he asks, and of nothing else. But he must ask them about everything, and hear their opinion, and afterwards deliberate by himself in his own way, and in these counsels and with each of these men comport himself, so that everyone may see that the more freely he speaks, the more he will be acceptable. Beyond these he should listen to no one, go about the matter deliberately, and be determined in his decisions. Whoever acts otherwise either acts precipitately through flattery, or else changes often through the variety of opinions, from which it follows that he will be little esteemed. I will give a modern instance of this. Preluca, a follower of Maximilian, the present emperor, speaking of his majesty, said that he never took counsel with anybody, and yet that he never did anything as he wished. This arose from his following the contrary method to the aforesaid. As the emperor is a secret man, he does not communicate his designs to any one or take any advice, but as on putting them into effect, they begin to be known and discovered, they begin to be opposed by those he has about him, and he is easily diverted from his purpose. Hence it comes to pass that what he does one day he undoes the next. No one ever understands what he wishes or intends to do, and no reliance is to be placed on his deliberations. A prince, therefore, ought always to take counsel, but only when he wishes, not when others wish. On the contrary, he ought to discourage absolutely attempts to advise him, unless he ask it, but he ought to be a great asker and a patient hearer of the truth about those things of which he has inquired. Indeed, if he finds that anyone has scruples in telling him the truth, he should be angry. And since some think that a prince who gains the reputation of being prudent is so considered, not by his nature but by the good counselors he has about him, they are undoubtedly deceived. It is an infallible rule that a prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised, unless by chance he leaves himself entirely in the hands of one man who rules him in everything, but happens to be a very prudent man. In this case, he may doubtless be well governed, but it would not last long, for that governor would in a short time deprive him of the state. But by taking counsel with many, a prince who is not wise will never have united counsels, and will not be able to bring them to unanimity for himself. The counselors will all think of their own interest, and he will be unable either to correct or to understand them. And it cannot be otherwise, for men will always be false to you unless they are compelled by necessity to be true. Therefore, it must be concluded that wise counsels, from whoever they come, must necessarily be due to the prudence of the prince, and not the prudence of the prince to the good counsels received. Chapter 24. Why the Princes of Italy have lost their states. The before-mentioned things, if prudently observed, make a new prince seem ancient, and render him at once more secure and firmer in the state than if he had been established there of old. For a new prince is much more observed in his actions than a hereditary one, and when these are recognized as virtuous, he wins over men more, and they are more bound to him than if he were of the ancient blood. For men are much more taken by present than by past things, and when they find themselves well off in the present, they enjoy it and seek nothing more. On the contrary, they will do all they can to defend him, so long as the prince is not in other things deficient. And thus he will have the double glory of having founded a new realm, and adorned it and fortified it with good laws, good arms, good friends, and good examples. As he will have double shame, who is born a prince and through want of prudence has lost his throne. And if one considers those rulers who have lost their position in Italy in our days, such as the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and others, one will find in them first a common defect as to their arms, for the reasons discussed at length. Then we observe that some of them either had the people hostile to them, or that if the people were friendly, they were not able to make sure of the nobility, for without these defects, states are not lost that have enough strength to be able to keep an army in the field. Philip of Macedon, not the father of Alexander the Great, but the one who was conquered by Titus Quintinus, did not possess a great state compared to the greatness of Rome and Greece, which assailed him, but being a military man, and one who knew how to ingratiate himself with the people, and make sure of the great, he was able to sustain the war against them for many years. And if at length he lost his power over some cities, he was still able to keep his kingdom. Therefore, those of our princes who had held their possessions for many years must not accuse fortune for having lost them, but rather their own remissness, for having never in quiet times considered that things might change, as it is a common fault of men not to reckon on storms in fair weather. When adverse times came, they only thought of fleeing instead of defending themselves, and hoped that the people, enraged by the insolence of the conquerors, would recall them. This measure, when others are wanting, is good, but it is very bad to have neglected the other remedies for that one. For nobody would desire to fall because he believed that he would then find someone to pick him up. This may or may not take place, and if it does not afford you security, as you have not helped yourself, but been helped like a coward. Only those defenses are good, certain and durable, which depend on yourself alone in your own ability. Chapter 25. How much fortune can do in human affairs, and how it may be opposed. It is not unknown to me how many have been, and are of opinion, that worldly events are so governed by fortune and by God, that men cannot by their prudence change them, and that on the contrary there is no remedy whatever, and for this they may judge it to be useless to toil much about them, but let things be ruled by chance. This opinion has been more held in our day, from the great changes that have been seen and are daily seen beyond every human conjecture. When I think about them, at times I am partly inclined to share this opinion. Nevertheless, that our free will may not be altogether extinguished, I think it may be true that fortune is the ruler of half our actions, but that she allows the other half or thereabouts to be governed by us. I would compare her to an impetuous river that, when turbulent, inundates the plains, casts down trees and buildings, removes earth from this side and places it on the other. Everyone flees before it, and everything yields to its fury without being able to oppose it. And yet, though it is of such a kind, still when it is quiet, men can make provisions against it by dikes and banks, so that when it rises, it will either go into a canal, or its rush will not be so wild and dangerous. So it is with fortune, which shows her power where no measures have been taken to resist her, and directs her fury where she knows that no dikes or barriers have been made to hold her. And if you regard Italy, which has been the seat of these changes, and which has given the impulse to them, you will see her to be a country without dikes or banks of any kind. If she had been protected by proper measures, like Germany, Spain, and France, this inundation would not have caused the great changes that it has, or would not have happened at all. This must suffice as regards opposition to fortune in general. But limiting myself more to particular cases, I would point out how one sees a certain prince today fortunate, and tomorrow ruined, without seeing that he has changed in character or otherwise. I believe this arises in the first place from the causes that we have already discussed at length, that is to say, because the prince who bases himself entirely on fortune is ruined when fortune changes. I also believe that he is happy whose mode of procedure accords with the needs of the times, and similarly, he is unfortunate whose mode of procedure is opposed to the times. For one sees that men in those things which lead them to the aim that each one has in view, namely, glory and riches, proceed in various ways, one with circumspection, another with impetuosity, one by violence, another by cunning, one with patience, another with the reverse, and each by these diverse ways may arrive at his aim. One sees also two cautious men, one of whom succeeds in his designs, and the other not, and in the same way two men succeed equally by different methods, one being cautious, the other impetuous, which arises only from the nature of the times, which does or does not conform to their method of procedure. From this it results, as I have said, that two men, acting differently, attain the same effect, and of two others acting in the same way, one attains his goal and not the other. On this depend also the changes in prosperity, for if it happens that time and circumstances are favorable to one who acts with caution and prudence, he will be successful, but if time and circumstances change, he will be ruined, because he does not change his mode of procedure. No man is found so prudent as to be able to adapt himself to this, either because he cannot deviate from that to which his nature disposes him, or else because, having always prospered by walking in one path, he cannot persuade himself that it is well to leave it, and therefore the cautious man, when it is time to act suddenly, does not know how to do so, and is consequently ruined. For if one could change one's nature with time and circumstances, fortune would never change. Pope Julius II acted impetuously in everything he did, and found the times and conditions so in conformity with that mode of procedure that he always obtained a good result. Consider the first war that he made against Bologna while Messer Giovanni Bentivogli was still living. The Venetians were not pleased with it, neither was the King of Spain. France was conferring with him over the enterprise, notwithstanding which, owing to his fierce and impetuous disposition, he engaged personally in the expedition. This move caused both Spain and the Venetians to halt and hesitate, the latter through fear, the former through the desire to recover the entire kingdom of Naples. On the other hand, he engaged with him the King of France, because seeing him make this move and desiring his friendship in order to put down the Venetians, that king judged that he could not refuse him his troops without manifest injury. Thus Julius, by his impetuous move, achieved what no other pontiff with the utmost human prudence would have succeeded in doing, because, if he had waited till all arrangements had been made and everything settled before leaving Rome, as any other pontiff would have done, it would never have succeeded, for the King of France would have found 1,000 excuses, and the others would have inspired him with 1,000 fears. I will omit his other actions, which were all of this kind, and which all succeeded well, and the shortness of his life did not suffer him to experience the contrary. For had times followed in which it was necessary to act with caution, his ruin would have resulted, for he would never have deviated from these methods to which his nature disposed him. I conclude then that fortune varying and men remaining fixed in their ways, they are successful so long as these ways conform to circumstances, but when they are opposed, they are unsuccessful. I certainly think that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, for fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to master her, to conquer her by force, and it can be seen that she lets herself be overcome by the bold rather than by those who proceed coldly. And therefore, like a woman, she is always a friend to the young, because they are less cautious, fiercer, and master her with greater audacity. Chapter 26. Exhortation to liberate Italy from the barbarians. Having now considered all the things we have spoken of, and thought within myself whether at present the time was not propitious in Italy for a new prince, and if there was not a state of things which offered an opportunity to a prudent and capable man to introduce a new system that would do honor to himself and good to the mass of the people, it seems to me that so many things concur to favor a new ruler that I do not know of any time more fitting for such an enterprise. And if, as I said, it was necessary in order that the power of Moses should be displayed, that the people of Israel should be slaves in Egypt, and to give scope for the greatness and courage of Cyrus, that the Persians should be oppressed by the Medes, and to illustrate the preeminence of Theseus, that the Athenians should be dispersed, so at the present time, in order that the might of an Italian genius might be recognized, it was necessary that Italy should be reduced to her present condition, and that she should be more enslaved than the Hebrews, more oppressed than the Persians, and more scattered than the Athenians, without a head, without order, beaten, despoiled, lacerated, and overrun, and that she should have suffered ruin of every kind. And although before now a gleam of hope has appeared which gave hope that some individual might be appointed by God for her redemption, yet at the highest summit of his career he was thrown aside by fortune, so that now, almost lifeless, she awaits one who may heal her wounds and put a stop to the pillaging of Lombardy, to the rapacity and extortion in the kingdom of Naples and in Tuscany, and cure her of those sores which have long been festering. Behold how she prays God to send someone to redeem her from this barbarous cruelty and insolence. Behold her ready and willing to follow any standard if only there be someone to raise it. There is nothing now she can hope for but that your illustrious house may place itself at the head of this redemption, being by its power and fortune so exalted, and being favored by God and the Church, of which it is now the ruler. Nor will this be very difficult if you call to mind the actions and lives of the men I have named. And although those men were rare and marvelous, they were none the less men, and each of them had less opportunity than the present, for their enterprise was not juster than this, nor easier, nor was God more their friend than he is yours. Here is a just cause. Iustrum enim est bellum quibus necessarium et pia arma ubi nolla nisi in armes spes est. Here is the greatest willingness, nor can there be great difficulty where there is great willingness, provided that the measures are adopted of those whom I have set before you as examples. Besides this, unexampled wonders have been seen here performed by God. The sea has been opened, a cloud has shown you the road, the rock has given forth water, manna has rained, and everything has contributed to your greatness. The remainder must be done by you. God will not do everything, in order not to deprive us of free will and the portion of glory that falls to our lot. It is no marvel that none of the before-mentioned Italians have done that which is to be hoped your illustrious house may do, and if in so many revolutions in Italy, in so many warlike operations, it always seems as if military capacity were extinct. This is because the ancient methods were not good, and no one has arisen who knew how to discover new ones. Nothing does so much honor to a newly risen man than the new laws and measures which he introduces. These things, when they are well based and have greatness in them, render him revered and admired, and there is not lacking scope in Italy for the introduction of every kind of new organization. Here there is a great virtue in the members, if it were not wanting in the heads. Look how in duels and in contest of a few, the Italians are superior in strength, dexterity, and intelligence. But when it comes to armies, they make a poor show, which proceeds entirely from the weakness of the leaders. For those that know are not obeyed, and everyone thinks that he knows, there being hitherto nobody who has raised himself so high, both by valor and fortune, as to make the others yield. Hence it comes about that for so long a time, in all the wars waged during the last 20 years, whenever there has been an entirely Italian army, it has always been a failure, as witness Taro, then Alexandria, Capuia, Genoa, Vela, Bologna, and Mestre. If your illustrious house, therefore, wishes to follow those great men who redeemed their countries, it is before all things necessary, as the true foundation of every undertaking, to provide yourself with your own forces, for you cannot have more faithful, or truer and better soldiers. And although each one of them may be good, they will united become even better when they see themselves commanded by their prince, and honored and favored by him. It is therefore necessary to prepare such forces in order to be able with Italian prowess to defend the country from foreigners. And although both the Swiss and Spanish infantry are deemed terrible, none the less they each have their defects, so that a third method of array might not only oppose them, but be confident of overcoming them. For the Spaniards cannot sustain the attack of cavalry, and the Swiss have to fear infantry which meets them with resolution equal to their own, from which it has resulted, as will be seen by experience, that the Spaniards cannot sustain the attack of French cavalry, and the Swiss are overthrown by Spanish infantry. And although a complete example of the latter has not been seen, yet an instance was furnished in the Battle of Ravenna, where the Spanish infantry attacked the German battalions, which are organized in the same way as the Swiss. The Spaniards, through their bodily agility and aided by their bucklers, had entered between and under their pikes, and were in a position to attack them safely without the Germans being able to defend themselves. And if the cavalry had not charged them, they would have utterly destroyed them. Knowing therefore the defects of both these kinds of infantry, a third kind can be created which can resist cavalry and need not fear infantry, and this will be done by the choice of arms and a new organization. And these are the things which, when newly introduced, give reputation and grandeur to a new prince. This opportunity must not, therefore, be allowed to pass, so that Italy may at length find her liberator. I cannot express the love with which he would be received in all those provinces which have suffered under these foreign invasions, with what thirst for vengeance, with what steadfast faith, with what love, with what grateful tears, What doors would be closed against him? What people would refuse him obedience? What envy could oppose him? What Italian would withhold allegiance? This barbarous domination stinks in the nostrils of everyone. May your illustrious house therefore assume this task with that courage and those hopes which are inspired by a just cause, so that under its banner our fatherland may be raised up, and under its auspices be verified that saying of Patriarch, "Valor against fell wrath will take up arms and be the combat quickly sped, for, sure, the ancient worth that in Italians stirs the heart is not yet dead."